alike. Yet over time, her name faded into obscurity. Her story, however, deserves to be told. And who better to bring it to us than two of India's most literary esteemed figures, Professor Neelum Saran Gour, ladies and gentlemen, and Dr. Sukriti Paul Kumar. I would invite, Sukrita Paul Kumar, I'm so sorry ma'am. I would invite you both to the stage for the further discussion. Put your hands together for Professor Neelum Saran Gour and Sukrita Paul Kumar ma'am. I would tell you about the author. Professor Neelum Saran Gour is a distinguished writer and academic known for her vivid storytelling and deep historical insight. A former professor of English at Allahabad University, she has authored several acclaimed works, including Requiem for a Giant, Stories of the Greats of Allahabad, and Invisible Ink. Her latest book, Requiem for Janki Bai Ilahabadi, brings to life the legacy of a woman who once mesmerized audience with her artistry but was later forgotten by history. Through meticulous research and masterful narration, she reclaims Janki Bai's place in the annals of Indian cultural history. And about our moderator, Dr. Sukrita Paul Kumar, joining her in the conversation is the distinguished Dr. Sukrita Paul Kumar, a poet, a critic, and a scholar of immense repute. A former fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, she has extensively worked on themes of displacement, identity, and women narratives. Her book, including Poems Come Home and Vanishing Words, reflect her profound understanding of literature and human emotions. With her deep engagement in cultural and gender studies, she will help us explore the significance of Janki Bai's journey and its relevance today. As we step into this discussion, we will uncover what it meant to be an artist and a woman. In a world shaped by rigid social structures, how Janki Bai carved a space for herself and why her story still resonates today. So without further ado, let's begin this fascinating conversation. Please join me in welcoming Professor Neelum Saran Gour and Dr. Sukrita Paul Kumar. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I don't know how to thank the organizers for this particular session because I discovered Neelum. I discovered Neelum through this. I have known her in the past. I have read something of her, but this novel, if you have not read, you are not a complete human being. It's a beautiful novel. And it is not limited to just language being great or style being great or the protagonist being great. I don't know how Neelum has done it in English. Neelum Saran Gour, you deserve tremendous accolades because you have done what Raja Rao wanted desperately to do. And what was that? I'm talking about the first generation of writers in English in India, fiction writers. And you know what Raja Rao had said? He had said, we have to write, there's a compulsion in us to write in English. We have the other language, but we can't write in that language. Which is true of me, which is true of perhaps you, obviously. And what he said was that yes, there was in those days a lot of talk about how English is the language of the colonizer, right? Raja Rao. Around the time when we got our independence, and a little before he was saying all this. And in one of the books that he wrote, Kanthapura, there was a preface that he wrote, which all of us should read, people who are dealing with English in any way, as Indians, whether we are teachers or we are writers. He said, what you should be doing is, write in English is after all a tool, but you are not writing what the British would want you to write, the way they would want you to write. You are writing English, which is, you have to own the language. You write, he said, like I write Kannada in English. His first language was Kannada, but we in English say Kannada, it is Kannada. And he said, and when you read the novel Kanthapura, I have given that as an example in one of the textbooks that I have done for Delhi University. It is prescribed. There is a whole page with one small para without any punctuation. There's a whole page. Because when we are speaking Hindi or Urdu or Punjabi or Kannada, we are not punctuating usually when we speak. Punctuation is a very Western idea where you have commas and full stops and semicolons and colons. So Kannada was, as per him, he said that to my ears, Kannada can be written only in that way in English. After all, I am writing about Kannada, right? Kannada life. And that was what, 70 years ago when he said that? Yeah, so it was more than 70 years. And when he was saying that, he was talking about those times when, but have we decolonized ourselves? Very few of us have decolonized ourselves. We have talked about it in seminars, how to decolonize, but we continuously look for accents which are British and now American, to give adequate respect to anyone who speaks English. Somebody comes to you with British accent, you will immediately say, yes sir, yes ma'am. Somebody talks to you in the Kannada or Punjabi way of English, you will not pay that much attention. This is what you notice when you go to the banks or post office or everywhere, right? So anyway, coming back to the point. After those so many decades, Neelum, there have been other people, Salman Rushdie, who wrote chutneyfied English, but it was chutneyfied English, an embellishment of the kind that we have, not as main dish, right? It was chutney. But I think slowly with Arundhati Roy, I think that happened. She, in her book, God of Small Things, is writing English which has metaphors from Malayalam. And I think that is why she probably got Booker, not only because of the way she used language, but the language spoke the truth of Kerala and of what she was trying to do in that particular book. So language plays a very big role in what you are trying to do. And after that, I have read you, Neelum, and I'm not joking. I have read you very carefully, this particular novel, and I noticed that you are writing not Hindi, not Urdu, not English, but Awadh culture in English. It's just Hindustani the way it has been used. And I can give you tons of examples, but I'm not here to prove a point. It is not just vocabulary that you see here. वो विरासत सिर्फ language की वैसे नहीं आई है, but also through idiom. For instance, when you say वो टोपी बदल brothers हैं, अब टोपी बदल brothers का जो क्या connotation है, she of course doesn't explain it, but you can make out. तो जैसे बोलते हैं ना मुंह बोली बहन, that kind of thing. Topi badal. You exchange your topi and you become brothers, right? So that is an idiom. But she's using those idioms, and I think so coming back to the point of language, I think what is happening there, and I would like to ask you this question so that we can have it in the form of a dialogue rather than I giving you a lecture of 40 minutes or 30 minutes. I think this is very important to notice the courage with which English language has been used by a thoroughly post-colonial, decolonized mind in the hands of Neelum. You read the book and you come out saying, oh, not beautiful English, but you say, oh my God, such living characters, such culture coming through. It's a whole era's culture that has come alive. And there's been a lot of research, obviously, tremendous amount of research, which is not translating as knowledge which is imposed on the narrative. You know, normally what happens is, if somebody has done a lot of research, then that research gets transferred as knowledge, and knowledge that is scholarship, and scholarship that gets imposed on the narration of the story. But this is not what she's doing. She's knitting it. That particular knowledge that she has acquired, she's knitting it into the narrative and making a narrative out of it. There's a storyline very clearly, but we'll talk about that later. But the question that I want to raise here is, was this a very actively conscious effort to innovate language, or did it come naturally? Because surely when you were taught English, your English teachers would not have spoken about this kind of English. I'm not sure. I don't know. Though Allahabad has a good tradition of good English teachers.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I'll take your question piecemeal, because there are many things which provoke a response, one by one. It is no coincidence that my PhD was on Raja Rao. I worked on Raja Rao intensively. So Raja Rao is one of my very potent influences. The second thing, that preface he talked about, we cannot write like the English, we can only write as Indians. And one more little coincidence which just struck me is that in Kanthapura, the long breathless narrative of an old grandmother. It's an old grandmother narrating the story. Now quite subconsciously, I didn't do this consciously, but my book is also narrated by a 90-year-old woman musician. And that's just one of the accidental correspondences. About English, it would be very pertinent to say that I swing around with language without being very self-conscious, because for me writing books is like singing alone in a room. You get the rhythm, you get the flow, you get the entire breadth of the language, because that's how you're experiencing it. You're not consciously using language, thinking about it. It comes in an unpremeditated manner. My very first book was Grey Pigeon and Other Stories, and I wrote Bangla in the English idiom. It might also be interesting that as a post-colonial joke on the British, I wrote a novel in which 3 British writers spoke their Gladstone and Disraeli English, Charles Dickens, Arthur Conan Doyle, and P.G. Wodehouse speaking to each other, with the pomposity of British English, and all the posturing and imposturing that language was. However, English publishers didn't find it funny. So nobody wanted to publish that book because Indian publishers said, what is this? Why are you writing in a British voice? And the British publishers said, oh my God, we want the Indian to write like an Indian. So, my publisher said, this is neither fish nor fowl. So what I'm trying to say is that I was not making any conscious, taking a political stance. I was enjoying the rus of the language. And it is quite possible to enjoy the rus of one language through the expression of another language. That's my answer.
Yeah, so obviously the ring of authenticity and the genuineness that you experience as you are reading that text comes out of a certain kind of a spontaneous overflow in as far as you are concerned, but it also resonates with what you say about music. And I was thinking about it, you know, there is tremendous amount of research that you seem to have done on music. I don't know whether you yourself are a musician or not. Do you sing? I do not know. Have you got any training in it? I do not know. But what I notice is that just as you kind of espouse a certain kind of theory, not bereft of experience, but you talk about the theoretical position of, say, Janki Bai, right? And what is music to her? And how she is, from her ustad, when she is learning and getting trained, she is given stories about ragas, right? Story after story. I was wondering, where did you get all that from? It is like, you know, encyclopedia at that time, but experiential, not like given in a data form. It's not like that. So I think there is tremendous research that has gone into music, and then the delineation of what is music as an art. And the knitting that you have done of each note out there. You are talking about how music is taught. Only an ustad can tell you that sometimes it takes a lifetime to be able to sing one note. And once you get it right, all the other 6-7 notes that you have, they fall in place. And when they fall in place, and I want to say that, you know, in music what you are doing, that seems to be also going into the art of writing. And you make Janki Bai write also. And so that's one aspect that I would like you to comment on. And let me propose another kind of a situation, or rather in the narrative what you are doing. Now, we people as teachers of English, we talk about postmodern style of writing, narration. I don't know whether this is postmodern or pre-modern, like Dastan Goy. You know, obviously you're a very good storyteller. So you as the narrator is also creating Janki Bai's account of herself within this text when she's writing her own story, which is a fabrication to a large extent. And that is mentioned again and again. You know, because all of us have self-images of some kind. So if you say, okay, I want to write an autobiography, what will you write? What you wish to be, or what you may perceive that you have done, but you may not have done that, right? So it's in a way certain kind of a storehouse of memory, and you use that term also. It is using of memory which is edited, pruned. Is that what you say? You say something like that. It is pruned, and that memory is fictionalized. Now that fictionalized thing about her own self, Janki Bai had a Diwane Janki. So she had created that, which she's using in this text. As she's telling the story of Janki, she's also using that text which Janki had written. And now the narrator, who is the author also, is also trying to distinguish somewhere and suggesting to the reader that this may be a lie. But she thinks it is this. Janki Bai thinks it is that. So look at so what are we talking about? We are talking about multiple narrations of the story of Janki Bai within one story. Would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. First about the music. I have received no training in music, but in my family, my father was a very, very advanced musician in his private capacity, and I grew up with all these rags. Many of this lore was narrated to me by my father, and a lot more lies in Indian language journals, in old sources, and I always felt that there was a whole wealth there which had not been tapped. it really invited preservation, because there was such beauty and such, I would say, the truth of a culture, the soul of a culture lay sleeping in many of these stories. So some of these stories I heard as a child, and I consciously followed up stories on Hindustani classical music, the spirituality of it, the bonding between cultures, the way Indian culture is actually a knitting together and integration of so many different streams, things which cannot be separated. For example, the Indic element cannot be separated from the Islamic element. In Hindustani classical music, South in Carnatic music perhaps, but in Hindustani classical music you just cannot do it. The immense contribution of various cultures, and that is reflected in their stories. So I really thought that, if you were to take one overarching theme of my books, it is about cultural coexistence in a plural civilization. So in the world of music, what I was trying to preserve was this element of integration and, mutual enrichment. Now about the other thing, I don't know, I really don't know. I mean, I'm not an academic anymore. I have abdicated academics voluntarily. So what is pre-modern, what is modern, what is post-modern? Now I have snapped the cord with these. We are talking about truth and the slippery nature of truth. Our own truth and our narrative are two different things. We have a mainstream narrative, some life episodes, but other than that there are micro-truths, many different truths which float above and beyond our lives. They are alternate truths, they are inverse truths, and we travel between our various truths, and that is what augments our living. So Janki wrote herself as she wanted to be, as all of us do. We have an image, we have a personal narrative, but then there are counter narratives which we are equally aware of. So truth itself is a very, very variegated and slippery thing, and that is what I was trying to do. Another thing is Janki consciously lied. It was not something involuntary. She wanted history to remember her in a certain way, and for that reason she wrote her story as she wanted to be read. However, her neighbors and other tawaifs of that area have a different story to tell. So what I tried to do was to read into the psychology of this personal myth making. What we are, what we would like to be, the fantasy of self that we all carry. So it was all these things which went into the making of Janki's story.
Also, I think one of the points that you make here in the book, which I think is a very significant point, it's always been very significant in our give and take in terms of Islam and Hinduism. Because I think what you're trying to do, which I find it extraordinary, is when you actually have a whole chapter, not chapter, but quite a large chunk, is talking about how Janki decides to become a Muslim. And when she does that, she has to actually also say, has to. She can't understand why the mother is not accepting. And the mother is what we call a pure Hindu. And there's a statement that you give to Janki which I find very touching. And that is when you say, do you know what is happening? Islam that I have adopted has given me an extension of my Hinduism. I've been trying to grapple with that. I think I catch the meaning because it's all music. And in music also, there is a mishran, as you said, of what is Hindu and what is Muslim. And I do not know how you manage it because it becomes a metaphor, which is a very convincing metaphor. Or how, when she adopts Islam, It is also because she says she feels very alienated because when she's amidst her own company, whether it is the person on the tabla or harmonium or whatever, many of them are Muslims and they talk a different language. And she says, I do not know what to make out of it until I decide that, okay, let me become a Muslim. And then there comes a point in the evolution of that sensibility. She is transcending, it's not just Mishran, she is transcending being Muslim or Hindu, and she's above this religious division. So in a way, unconsciously perhaps, you have given answers to the very divisive nature that we seem to be developing in this subcontinent, which of course, without sounding very political, but in Pakistan this is what happened. In the name of Pak, pure Muslim, you know. So it started happening there, and probably there was a kind of a reaction or whatever that we are all going through it at the moment. I don't want to take any side, but through Janki's music, and towards the end, this is the climax. When you talk about Janki as a rag that has been created, Janki herself has become the music that she created. It's a rag. And there is that fakir who, when he comes, often when she is encountering him, and I had that page opened here, when the fakir, she says, is he in my dream or am I in his? There is no dividing line between dream and reality here. And is he singing me into being? I thought I had created a raga and probably its name was Janki. That connects me to the title, Requiem in Raga Janki. Actually, this is the story.
It's the rag.
It's the rag, but it's also requiem. So why did you think that? Because it's the death that she symbolizes. Raga comes into being with her death.
Many different layers there. Our story, you know what a rag is? There are some basic notes, but those notes are made, performed in different combinations. You intuit different patterns. You sing many songs using the same basic alphabet. So the novel has been written as a rag. There is a central theme, but the story is told in multiple ways, just as a rag is sung. There are some episodes in Janki's life which were actually historic episodes. They were not inventions by me. But then how those episodes are experienced and how they are expressed depended on the rendering. And that's how I have conceived the whole book as a rag. Now about the fakir, there actually is a legend that when Janki was dying, she used to feel that there was a man outside her window, a ragged man like a fakir. And right through it, there is this profound spiritual experience, the tapasya of music and the sense of being in contact with some higher presence. Right through you get this presence, the Sayyid of Musiqi. That the soul of music visits you when your tapasya, when your sadhana is complete. And how does that soul of music come? When she is dying and in delirium, she wonders who that fakir is. Her father had run away, her son had disappeared, and she wondered who that fakir was. Was it the father? Was it the lost son? Or was it the soul of music? Was it the Sayyid of Musiqi? So in her delirium, there is a finality, and there's also a kind of fresh wonderment. So death is not an ultimate moment. It's an opening up, a new wonder. And that's That's sometime one of the things which I was singing alone, when I was writing this book. So the note which my heart struck was this, that when your tapasya is complete, then you have a visitation. And your soul registers that visitation in different ways. So that's how I imagine Janki and the fakir. And she is beyond religion then, because Sukrita, there is a point in the delirium when she imagines that, see, in Allahabad there is the Ganga and the Yamuna and the so-called mythical Saraswati. The Ganga symbolizing Hindu tradition, the Yamuna symbolizing Islamic, Shringar Ras, and this is all Sattvic. And she's had a bad experience with her marriage. She imagines that she is trying to cross over from the Ganga side to the Yamuna side and she cannot make it. And she hears the voice of her ustad saying, don't bother. Don't bother about the banks. Don't bother about the Ganga or the Yamuna. You are on a mightier river, because art and spirituality is a greater stream than all these little narrow denominations. So her religion was her art, and that is also one of the things which I wanted to express.
Yes, and then you also go into making Janaki. I don't know if that is also a reality, or maybe it is, because there was this Divane Janki, because she writes poetry.
Yes, that's an actual book.
It's an actual book. So I think there also, if anyone were to be researching and doing a theory of Saundaryavad, aesthetics of, music or the art of writing poetry, I think this has to be consulted, because you are talking about how I vanishes totally. The I vanishes in the making of a poem or in the making of a raga. And then in that context only, I get confused about why a requiem.
Why a requiem? Because this is a story which died. There was no documentary evidence of this woman's presence, just a few ragged bits of documentation in magazines. It was a story I had to unearth. And then there were, I just caught the footprints of a presence. I was very deeply attracted to this personality. As I said in one of my interviews, the person behind the persona. I really was very drawn to this woman, her life, and also her her spiritual commitment to her art. So I would say that there were just little scattered bits about her, and I had to imagine intensively, using emotional intelligence to intuit her story. This was a story for which a certain mourning was in place, that she had been forgotten even in her own city. So it was in that sense that I called it a requiem.
And also in that, just as you let the line between the Hindu and the Muslim melt, I think you are doing that also between life and death.
Yes.
And how there is a crossover. And in fact, she starts imagining herself as being reborn as a raga. Somewhere you say that.
Yes.
And I think if we were to, I can see you standing at not very much of an ease. So if we were to probably come towards the conclusion, I love the way you have quoted Toni Morrison.
Yes.
And you say, if there is a book you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. It's as simple as that. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And now I would request, if in the public, from the audience, if someone wants to ask questions related to the book or the author. Anyone? Okay, 1 second.
It's there in the book.
Asking that in the novel, there is a Chappan Churi title given to Janki. So talk about that. Actually, the novel is talking about it.
इलाहाबाद शहर में जानकी बाई को छप्पन छुरी के नाम से पुकारा जाता था, और इसके बारे में भी वही बात है कि अलग अलग कहानियां हैं. सत्य क्या है हमें नहीं मालूम. जानकी अपनी दास्तान जानकी में कहती हैं कि जानकी से लोग बहुत जलते थे. वो 12 साल की थी बनारस में, और एक दूसरा एक गाने वाला था, उसने जलन के मारे आक्रमण कर दिया. लेकिन ये सच नहीं है, ये जानकी की कहानी है. और भी लोगों की अलग अलग इसके वर्जन्स हैं. सच तो ये है that she was attacked, 56 stabs of the knife, because she was left there for dead. But क्यों? और भी इसकी कहानियां हैं कि a spurned lover had attacked her. वो भी एक फिक्शन है. असली जो कहानी है वो थोड़ी घिनौनी कहानी है. और जानकी शायद एस्थेटिकली she didn't want that to go on record. जानकी के पिता एक हलवाई थे और उनकी एक रखेल थी, लक्ष्मी उनका नाम था. उनको वो ले आई थी, वो भी उनके घर में रहती थी. लेकिन उन्होंने कोई रिश्ता बना लिया था एक पुलिस वाले के साथ. वो पुलिस वाला मिठाई की दुकान में आता था उनसे मिलने. जानकी ने उन्हें पकड़ लिया था इन अ कॉम्प्रोमाइजिंग पोजीशन. तो गुस्से में आके वो जो पुलिस वाले थे जिनका नाम था रघुनंदन दुबे, उन्होंने बर्फी काटने वाली चाकू से जानकी को अटैक किया था और 56 बार अटैक करके उनको, छोटी लड़की थी, 12 साल की लड़की थी, छोड़ दिया था. बट वो मरी नहीं थी. बनारस की महारानी ने उनका इलाज कराया. तो सच तो ये है जो उनके पड़ोसियों की जबान पर थी. उनकी जबान पर ये सब नहीं था. वो नहीं चाहती थी कि ये सेंसर्ड कंटेंट जो है वो इतिहास में जाए. सो दैट इज द bit about.
Also, somewhere you mentioned it in the book. Perhaps, she was very conscious of her being very ugly.
Yes.
Extremely ugly, because there were these stabs, what people are saying, Godson, that there were those scars of the stabs, right? So a lot of them on the face. So Chappan Churi, And Chappan Churi, by the way, is also someone who is so beautiful कि ऐसे लगता है वो दूसरों को stab कर रही है. So she was also creating double kinds of myths probably for herself. And also there is a statement which I seem to have read your novel very well. There's another one, there's another statement that you say that वो ये कहती थी कि ये सूरत को नहीं देखेंगे, मैं अपने म्यूजिक को इतना वो माहिर हो जाऊंगी उसमें that I would be known for my सीरत, not सूरत.
वो महाराजा रेवा के दरबार में गाने गई और उनके मुंशी ने उनको बुलाया था. मुंशी ने उनकी शक्ल नहीं देखी थी. जब उनकी शक्ल देखी तो वो बिल्कुल बहुत घबरा गए, क्योंकि उन्होंने देखा कि ये कोई खूबसूरत महिला है नहीं. और खूबसूरत क्या, बदसूरत बड़ा कठोर शब्द है, उसको बोलना नहीं चाहिए, लेकिन डेफिनेटली शी वॉज नॉट पर्सनेबल. तो उन्होंने कहा मैं क्या करूं, अब किसी दूसरे गायिका का इंतजाम तो हो नहीं सकता, मैं क्या करूं. वो घबरा गए. तो जानकी ने कहा अब आप क्या करें, मैं जैसी हूं आपको काम चलाना पड़ेगा मुझसे ही. आप ऐसा करिए, आप कह दीजिए महाराज को कि मैं पर्दे के पीछे से गाती हूँ. सो कर्टन्स वर अरेंज्ड एंड शी sang. रात भर की महफिल में शी sang फ्रॉम बिहाइंड द कर्टन. महाराजा जो थे वो एकदम से बहुत उत्सुक हो गए. तो उन्होंने आके जब खत्म हुआ, महफिल खत्म हुई सवेरे, तो उन्होंने पर्दे को खींच के अलग कर दिया और देखा जानकी. तो उन्होंने कहा ये वही गायिका है जो एक बादशाह की नज़र से कतराती है. वो अंग्रेजी में मैंने लिखा है, हियर इज द वुमन. तो जानकी ने कहा कि मैंने तो आपका ख्याल रख के अपनी शक्ल को ढक रखा. तो महाराजा झेपे और बोले कि किसकी शक्ल की बात कर रही है, मैंने तो कोई शक्ल नहीं देखी, मैंने तो दरबारी और मालकोस और जजेवंती की शक्ल देखी. तो उन्होंने, जानकी का ये बहुत फेमस सेंटेंस है, दिस इज हिस्टोरिकली ट्रू. शी सेज महाराज, फनकार का इम्तिहान उसकी सीरत से होता है, सूरत से नहीं. सो that is that actually happened. Yes, it happened.
Yeah. So there are, this book is full of, as I said, such wisdom about aesthetics, you know. And that's why I feel that if all that is collected, and I'm sure some researcher or the other will do it because there are so many young people also, but even old ones should pay attention to this because I think this book is offering a lot. It is also got something to do with how what is not recorded by history can be very beautifully brought out in a very live fashion in the form of a story. So it's historical, but it's fiction. It's fiction, but it is historical. It's like that.
Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much. Thank you so much. And now we move on towards our quiz question for the audience, which is I will repeat the question and someone from the audience has to raise their hand if you know the answer, and if you say the answer without raising the hands you might be disqualified, and then we will move on to the next question. So politely you have to raise your hand, and the moderator can decide who has to answer. So the question is very simple. Janki Bai Ilahabadi was a noted dash, and you have to raise your hand. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, ma'am, would you think she is right? Okay. Okay. So, should we call her on the stage and give the book, or we should? Okay. De do. So, Nini, please, you can come.
So I say hesitatingly
It's a wonderful book by Dale Carnegie. Neelum ma'am, if you would also present the book, and we will have a small photograph. I'm sorry, a small moment for the photograph. Hello, check. Thank you so much. And as we conclude this deeply enriching session, I would now like to request Reema Ahuja ji to please come up on the stage. And Raghav sir. Yes, Raghav Chandra ji, आप भी आइएगा please stage पे. How can I miss you on the stage? And we would be pleased to present our esteemed speakers with a memento as a token of our gratitude. Padma Shri Bhil artist Bhuri Bhai has created this artwork for BLF 2025, depicting the connection between nature, earth, the human being, and the environment, and the circularity inherent and the imperative to our existence. To our incredible speakers, thank you for sharing your wisdom, creativity, and insights, which have deeply, deeply inspired us. This memento is a tribute to your contributions and the lasting impact of your words on our hearts and minds. Put a huge round of applause for our speakers and the member of the society, and as well as the president. Thank you so much, and we will resume our next sessions shortly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting with our next session, so it would be requested if you could take your seats. The Maratha Century. We invite Uday S. Kulkarni ji in conversation with Rahul Narona ji. Today we turn our gaze to a pivotal period in Indian history, the Maratha Century. History, as Nehru said, is the story of man's struggle through the ages. The story of Raghoba is a compelling chapter in this struggle. We are honored to welcome Sir Uday S. Kulkarni, a distinguished historian and author of several acclaimed books of 18th century Indian history, including Solstice at Panipat, The Era of Baji Rao, and now Raghoba. A deep dive into a pivotal moment in Maratha history. Dr. Kulkarni is also a trained surgeon and a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society. In conversation with Dr. Kulkarni is Rahul Narona, a senior associate editor with India Today, currently in charge of MP and Chhattisgarh. A journalist since 2002, he brings a wealth of experience covering politics, history, and current affairs. Welcome on the stage, and as Churchill said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So let us learn from the Maratha century. Thank you so much, Udayji, and I would transfer the mic to Sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rahul, and that's Dr. Kulkarni. Let me first introduce Dr. Kulkarni, although you've also done that. He's, besides being an author of